Hello and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. So today's topic is nutrition, and we're going to look in regards to learning what to eat per meal. So if you're deciding what to put in your meal, that's what we're going to talk about today. And basically what it comes down to is, what do you want to get out of that meal? And what we mean by that is what we eat it can give us energy, it can give us the ability to repair our body, it kind of like fuels our body and makes changes. So what changes do we need at that time? So this is something we're going to talk about. So if we look at our macronutrients, which are carbs, fats, protein, and water, but people don't talk about water much. So the big three that we would need that relate to calories is protein, carbs, and fats. And that's pretty much what is going to be made up of in your food. So when we talk about what we want to get from our meal, it kind of depends on what do we need in terms of protein demands and what do we need in terms of carbs or fat demands. So what time of the day are we at? What are we doing? All those things. So if we look at this, protein is, we've talked about it more in depth in past podcasts, podcast number 33. We kind of talked about how much protein do you need and what all the protein sources there are out there and the different purposes of protein. So in general, protein helps us repair and build our muscles and body structures. So it kind of does work of the body, kind of fixes and heals up the body. It can kind of build new structures when our old ones are beat up. So if we go into the gym and we beat up our muscles and tear them up with weights, protein is what goes in and fixes those muscles, repairs them back to a healthy state, and if you have excess protein around, it'll help build the muscles up thicker. So that's what protein does. It's kind of like our repair system. So that's its main role. So the other kind of like side benefit we have with protein is when we eat a meal that has protein in it. So if I'm going to eat, say, a 300 calorie meal, and I know that 100 calories are coming from my protein, that will make me feel full, and I'm only going to end up having 200 calories coming from carbs or fats. So it helps kind of buffer the amount of carbs and fats you need in your meals, and it helps you better regulate your energy nutrient intake, which is our carbs and fats. So those are the nutrients we eat to give us energy, like gas in our gas tank. So our body can break protein down for energy, but it doesn't really like doing that, and it prefer to use it for different repair in building structures and doing things like that. It would rather use carbs and fats as our fuel sources, so our gas in our gas tank. So that's what we kind of look for is if we overeat carbs and fats, if compared to what we use. So if I put too much gas in my gas tank and then I don't burn it all up, our body is likely to store some of that excess as body fat. So when we have some of our meal consisting of protein, it reduces the amount of carbs and fats we need in that meal to make our total calories, and therefore it reduces our likelihood to have excess of calories sitting around, and that can reduce our likelihood to have some of that excess converted to body fat. So having protein in your meals helps you feel fuller, and you don't need as much carbs and fats, which helps you reduce the likelihood of storing body fat. So protein is helpful, like we said, for all the repairing structures, building new structures, but it also helps buffer how many carbs and fats we need, and therefore can help us stay leaner eating a higher calorie meal. So that's kind of the nitty-gritty little quick rundown of protein. Now, the other things we said are carbs and fats. So carbohydrates, we did a deeper, in-depth podcast, number 21, on carbohydrates. Again, we kind of talked about what are the best sources of carbohydrates and what are the different types and yada, yada, yada. So, in general, carbohydrates are quick sources of energy. So, it gets the energy quickly into our system. We burn it up, so it's kind of like quickly used up. So, it's quick energy now, but it doesn't last very long. And there's two basic types of carbohydrates. We have sugars, which are like super duper quick acting. Sometimes they can kick in within a matter of minutes, so 5 minutes or so. And then we have complex carbohydrates, which are more like your potatoes, pastas, bagels, breads, rather than candies, stuff like that. And complex carbohydrates, they're still quicker acting as compared to fats, but they're slower acting compared to sugars. So sometimes they can take 20, 30 minutes or so to get into your bloodstream and get to be used. So in general, carbohydrates give us energy now. So it kicks in within 5 to 20 minutes. We'll just give a general time frame like that. but it doesn't last very long. It usually burns up in, say, 3 to 4 hours. So I'm giving some time frames here that definitely have variability to them, but I want to give you guys just good general rules of thought. So the specifics are just going to kind of muddle things up. So let's think of this in general. So we said protein kind of helps build and repair our body. We don't really use it for energy. It's more the repair system of our body. We have carbohydrates, and we said they're quick energy. So we can do sugars, which is like super duper quick energy, or we can do complex carbs, which is relatively quick, but not that fast. And then the slowest form of energy intake would energy usage and stuff would be fats. And our past podcast on number 29 is the one on fats with more details in that one. So, and fats are kind of a longer lasting source of energy. So they take longer to kind of kick in, and you often don't even really feel that energy kicking in, but they do last longer. So we know with sugars, we all have heard of like having that energy spike, where you drink a bunch of sugar, you feel crazy manic energy right away, you're bouncing off the walls, then you crash. So that's kind of like a high, like peak of energy in, energy out. Complex carbohydrates are kind of like a more rounded peak. So a little bit of energy in, a little bit of energy out, but it's a calmer kind of up and down. Whereas fats is like a little tiny like anthill. So it's just real slow peak up in energy, real slow peak down in energy. So you can think of it as like those 3 type of waves. So sugars is big quick spike. Complex carbohydrates is like a medium spike in terms of how much you feel the energy versus how long it lasts. And then fats are kind of really low level. It takes a while to feel the energy, and it takes a while to burn it up. So that's kind of the idea. Now within fats, there are 2 types of fats we generally talk about too. There are more than 2, but this is again just trying to keep this general, are saturated fats and unsaturated fats. So saturated fats are generally more like animal products, and they're deemed as being unhealthy, but you definitely still need saturated fat in your diet, and specifically for like hormone regulation and other types of good health aspects. But generally saturated fat should be kept to about 1/3 of your overall fat intake. And then unsaturated fats, which are considered normally the healthier fats, they're like oils, nuts, avocados, more plant-based fats and stuff. They're considered healthier, but it doesn't mean you should have them exclusively. You still need those saturated fats in there. So unsaturated should equate to about 2/3. But there's no real energy difference between unsaturated versus saturated. So we know that with carbohydrates, the 2 sources we have are sugars and complex, and we know the sugars are faster energy and the complex is a little bit slower energy for being a carbohydrate. In the world of fats, you're not going to get a difference of energy between saturated and unsaturated. So you don't need to distinguish them as differently in terms of the length of their energy. They're just considered 2 different types of fats. That way you're aware of them. So when we look at this and we think of kind of putting this all together, so how do we create a meal? At almost all times, we're going to need some degree of protein. Because if we're up and active, even if we're just kind of sitting around at our desk doing nothing, just kind of doing computer work, our body is still moving around. It's still using resources in terms of muscular resources and body structure resources like enzymes and other stuff. So some type of protein is necessary at every meal. Now, if you're more active, say you're up on your feet, you're moving around, you're loading boxes, moving things around, just kind of physically active, up and moving, you're going to need even more protein. Then, say you're immediately after a workout. You're going to need a lot of protein because that's the most beneficial time for it. So depending on how muscularly and how systemly stressed you are at the moment will determine how much protein you need at that meal. Okay? So if you're super duper active and you just came out of like a workout, you're going to need the higher end of your meal of protein intakes. If you're kind of mediumly active, you're going to need a medium amount. And if you're minimally active, you need a minimal amount. Now, how much is minimal, medium, and kind of the high amounts? That depends on per person, depends on the body size and how much muscle mass they have. And that's where listening to podcast number 33, which will tell you specifically how much protein you need. So in general, again, this is general, around 0.8 to 1 gram per pound of body weight is pretty good for a daily intake. So let's do 1 gram because it's going to make the math a little easier for me. So if we say we weigh 200 pounds and I have 4 meals a day, I would be aiming for about 50 grams of protein per meal. And that's a pretty considerable amount of protein. So that's like 8 ounces of meat or a little bit more. So what we would look for is at that meal, if I'm looking at a meal, say right after training, and I know that my normal high intakes are around 50, I'd probably want to get a full protein dosed meal at that time. So I'd aim for that 50, maybe even 60 grams of protein. Whereas if I'm kind of like low level, doing nothing, is an off day, I don't have a lot of muscle damage, I can bring that down to the lower level. So maybe I only need 30 or 20 grams of protein. So you're going to have to play around with that a little bit depending on your daily needs, divided by how many meals per day you're eating. So we have some people who struggle to eat 2 or 3 meals a day. We have other people who eat, 6, 7, 8 times a day if you count in every time they take calories in. So for example, I have a breakfast, I have like a mid-morning thing I have before my midday clients, so that way I can work out after my clients if it's a daytime workout. I drink calories and consume calories while I train. I consume them right after I train. I have a mid-afternoon kind of evening meal, then I have a meal before I go to bed. So that's 6 meals. So I can divide my daily protein up divided by 6, and that tells me a general number that I should be a little bit above or a little below at every meal. So that's how you would want to do it, is take your daily protein requirement, divide it by the number of meals you typically have per day, and if you're inactive at that time of meal, you could probably be in the lower end of that number. If you're super active, you can be on the higher end of that number. So that's kind of how you're going to want to break that down. Now, how about our carbs and fats? So how we put that together per meal is kind of what are we doing around the time of the meal? So am I busy, or am I kind of like I'm awake but I'm not doing much? So if we're awake but we're not doing much, means I'm like kind of sitting at my computer, playing around, like typing up some work, searching YouTube, just kind of like I'm alive but I'm not doing anything. You're going to focus mostly on fats at that meal. Okay, and how we're putting this meal together in general is for someone to have adequate amount of recovery, which is protein, adequate amount of energy, which is overall caloric intake, but trying to stay as lean as they can, meaning they're trying to minimize any excessive amounts of carbs or fats, any excessive calories, so that way they have the lowest level of kind of fat storage or acquisition, like adding, throughout the day. So does it mean that everyone who's doing like low-level activities has to eat fats? No, you can eat carbs. You just have to be very mindful of how much you're having of them, and likely you're going to want to have a longer lasting carb. Because if you eat a sugary item when you're sitting around doing nothing, you're going to get that big spike of energy for no reason whatsoever, because you're not going to do anything with it. And then you have a big crash, which just makes you feel like crap. And then you're going to be more likely to eat your next meal even earlier than you need to. And you're going to have like more of like a rush to kind of overeat at that meal, because your body experienced a little bit of a spike and then deficit from that sugar. So the more often you can consume sugar throughout the day, you're going to have bigger ups and downs in your energy levels. And anytime you have a low, when you have a low in energy plus a low in caloric intake, your body's going to respond by trying to consume over its normal amounts at the next meal. So when you consume sugars frequently throughout the day, you're more likely to overeat, and especially overeat later in the day. So that's why we're recommending, if you're low level, not doing much at this time of the meal, you want to have fats, because it helps sustain the type of energy that you need. So if you're low level active, fats are a low level type of energy. They kick in at a low level and they last a good bit and they kind of taper off. So it's more of a calm energy spike, which matches the fact that you're being in a calm energy state. So that's why. And then also, if you're eating fats, like we said, you're less likely to overeat at later meals. So this helps curb cravings and kind of inconsistency in the way you feel energy-wise. So you're going to feel a more sustained, kind of dull level of energy, but that's okay because you're doing a dull level of activity. Now, what if you are active? If you're up and active and you're on your feet, but it's kind of a normal everyday type busy. So maybe you're a teacher and you're up on your feet kind of just teaching. Or you're a nurse and you're getting up and down from the nurse's desk and, looking at patients. Whatever you might do. You're an office worker, but you have something where you kind of sit at your desk for a minute or two, but you're up and active and moving around. So any kind of job, daily activity, where it's your normal daily activity, but it is active, it's up on your feet. You're going to focus on complex carbohydrates at those meals around those times, because you do want that little bit of a faster source of energy. And it's okay if it tapers off a little bit fast because you can just eat again later. But you need to have your gas tank a little bit fuller than just fats alone, because you're going to try to use that gas faster. So you want energy a little bit more now so you can burn it up and use it and be more active. Now, what if you're about to go into a workout? Then you'd want to have your sugars. You'd want to have fast digesting energy, so that way you can get access to it right away and be able to use it right away. So that's when having sugars is kind of the best, is when you have a really high spike of activity, which is what the sugars do, is they spike in terms of energy and calories. They create a spike of energy and then they taper off. Well, if you are going to do a workout and you are looking for a spike of activity and then taper off that activity, then sugars match what you need. So that's the idea of kind of like the basic science of creating a single meal, is at that meal, what is the stress to my muscles in my system? I would have a protein intake that adequately matches that. So if it's a low level of stress and I haven't really worked out recently, or like recently that day, or even like didn't work out the day before, then I'm going to need a lower level of protein than my normal quote-unquote average. So I still need some, I just need a lower amount. Whereas if we're post-workout, I'm going to need the highest amount, and everything else will be kind of in the middle. Then our energy nutrients, our carbs and fats, again, they kind of match our activity level. If I'm low level, not doing much, fats are probably the better choice. If I'm active, but it's my normal active, complex carbs are probably the better choice. And if I'm super active and I'm about to do something like a workout or a physical activity that's really high energy demand, then I want to go ahead and have sugars and those quicker digesting carbohydrates. So that's the idea. So that's typically what I tend to do throughout my day, and that's what I try to do with my clients, is I try to ask them what are the meal times they normally have, what are they doing around the day, like what's their typical schedule of the day, when do they work out, when do they go to work, when do they like sit around doing nothing, and we try to match those demands of the day to the foods, so that way we can match the demands and the foods equally and get the least amount of excessive intake, which creates the lowest degree of body fat kind of accumulation. And if you time this stuff correctly, where your overall caloric intake from your normal daily activity, if your overall caloric intake is matched to your daily activity but slightly below, that helps you slowly burn body fat all day. If you match your daily activities, like the spikes and the ups and downs of your daily activities, with your food, and then make that all calorically in a surplus, you'll get bigger muscles. So that's the idea of how diets work, is you want to think per meal, and that matches your demands per time of the day that you eat a meal. Then overall, globally throughout the day, you would take your calories up or down depending on what your goal is. Whether you're trying to lose body fat or whether you're trying to build muscle, or whether you're trying to stay the same. Okay? So that gives us a quick little breakdown. I think that kind of stuff is helpful to give you guys just a general concept of how nutrition works and not get so worried about all the little details sometimes, because too often people over-focus on details and they miss the bigger picture stuff. So, and it's kind of, when you can look at it with a fresh perspective, you can see that people over-focus on the wrong things, and they're wasting a lot of emotional energy and effort, and even physical energy and effort on the wrong stuff. So, to learn more about that, what is the overall right stuff to focus on, go listen to podcast number 41 called Diet Right, What Matters Most. We break down the 5 biggest components that add up to a diet, and that would be a diet for weight loss or a diet for weight gain. And what are the most important things, the most things to focus on to get the best bang for your buck in terms of your focus, effort, and energy. Okay? So hopefully this helped. If you have any specific questions about this and you would want any more clarity, shoot us an email, brutalironjim@gmail.com. So we'll help you, we'll give you some clarity, or maybe even make an additional podcast about your specific question that'll help everyone else as well. So the more feedback we get from you guys, the better we can make this stuff fine-tuned to exactly what you want from it. Cool. So, hopefully you found this information helpful. And if you like this type of information, you can find more from us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, Brutal Iron Gym. Also, if you like the podcast, you can sign up to become a patron of the podcast by donating $10 or more a month. Helps the podcast kind of keep going, pay for all the hosting sites and costs and stuff. And then for your donation, we'll send you a training program if you'd like. And it can be a program on any goal. So strength, aesthetics, general health, training at home with no equipment, whatever it might be. Whatever you want, we'll send it for you, okay? So if you'd like to become a patron, you can do so directly in the Podbean app. You can send us an email or do a Google search, Become a Patron, Brutal Iron Gym Podcast. And if you like the podcast, please share it with family and friends, so the more people we help, the happier the world will be. And if you have any questions, feedback, or suggestions, we'd love, love, love to hear from you. So this podcast is for you, so we want to know what you want to learn about. And you can reach us at our email, brutalironGym@gmail.com. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.